You wake to the familiar gnawing in your gut, not the sharp pain of a fresh wound, but the deep, persistent ache that has become your constant companion for the past 3 weeks. It claws at your insides like something alive, something desperate to escape. The protein bars ran out yesterday, those compressed rectangles of industrial paste that tasted like cardboard soaked in machine oil, but at least filled the void. Now there's nothing but the weight of emptiness and the metallic taste of your own saliva. The air in your makeshift barracks carries the usual cocktail of human misery, unwashed bodies, recycled atmosphere, and that underlying chemical tang that permeates everything in Hive World Tertius. But today, something different cuts through the familiar stench. Something that makes your mouth water involuntarily, something that reminds you of home. No, that can't be right. Nothing on this emperor-forsaken world could smell like the Sunday roast your mother used to prepare. But it does. Rise and shine, you miserable grok spawn. Sergeant Voss's voice carries the usual mixture of authority and dark humor that has kept your squad functional through 8 months of this siege. But there's something else in his tone today, a satisfaction you haven't heard since before the supply lines were cut. Today we feast like proper Imperial citizens. You prop yourself up on your cot, joints protesting from another night spent on recycled hab block foam that's lost all pretense of comfort. Around you, your squad mates are stirring with unusual energy. Private Martinez, barely old enough to shave when he joined the Guard 6 months ago, is actually smiling. When was the last time you saw anyone smile? Surge found us some real protein, Corporal Kane announces, his weathered face showing an animation you'd forgotten he was capable of. Kane has been fighting the Emperor's wars for 15 years. You've seen him maintain that same stoic expression while ordering orbital bombardments on civilian targets and watching his own men die in toxic mud. But now he looks almost hungry. Not just physically hungry, though the Emperor knows you all are, but eager in a way that makes something in your stomach twist. You follow the smell toward what used to be the command bunker's mess area. The scent grows stronger with each step, rich and savory in a way that makes your knees weak. It's been so long since food smelled like food instead of industrial necessity. Your mouth floods with saliva, and you have to swallow hard to keep from drooling like some feral underhive scavenger. The sight that greets you stops you cold. Sergeant Voss stands over an improvised cooking station, metal sheets balanced over chemical fuel cells, tending to several large cuts of meat that sizzle and pop in their own juices. The protein is a deep red that speaks of freshness, of something that was alive recently. Fat renders and pools, filling the air with an aroma so intoxicating that your hunger pangs intensify to the point of actual pain. Where did you begin? But Voss raises a hand. Don't ask questions you don't want answered, soldier. The Emperor provides for his faithful. He flips one of the portions with practiced ease, the meat releasing a fresh wave of scent that makes your vision blur slightly. Founded in the abandoned sector, sealed storage, some manufactorum worker's private stash probably. The explanation feels thin, but your starving brain seizes on it desperately. Of course, someone was hoarding protein while the rest of you starved. It happens in every siege, every extended campaign. The selfish always try to preserve themselves at the expense of the collective good. Finding their cash is justice, isn't it? Martinez leans over your shoulder, close enough that you can smell the desperation on his breath. Look at the marbling on that one, he whispers, and there's something unsettling about the way he says it. Too knowledgeable, too appreciative. Bet it's going to be tender as anything. You nod absently, trying to shake off the growing unease. The meat does look exceptional, better than anything you've seen since leaving the core worlds. The fat distribution is perfect, the color ideal. Whoever was hoarding this knew their protein. Part of you wants to ask more questions, but a larger part of you is already imagining that first bite, the way the juice will run down your chin, the satisfaction of finally, having something substantial in your gut. The cooking process becomes hypnotic. You find yourself standing there for what feels like hours but is probably only minutes, watching the meat transform from raw red to a perfect golden brown. The fat crackles and spits, sending up aromatic smoke that seems to wrap around your head like incense. Your squad gathers in a loose circle around Voss's makeshift kitchen, and for the first time in months, you see something approaching contentment on their faces. Remember the last time we had real meat? Private Chen. No, wait. Chen disappeared 2 weeks ago. Patrol casualty, according to the reports. You shake your head, trying to clear the confusion. Too much hunger, not enough sleep. It's getting harder to keep track of everyone. The last time was. You try to recall, but the memory feels slippery. When was the last time? Before the siege, certainly. Back when the supply convoys were still making it through. Back when there were enough of you to form proper patrols. Back when the squad roster had more than a dozen names on it. Doesn't matter, Kane says, and his voice has taken on that dreamy quality people get when describing something transcendent. This looks even better. Prime cut. You can tell by the way it's cooking, even heat distribution, minimal moisture loss. Whoever prepared this knew what they were doing. There's something in Kane's words that makes you pause. Whoever prepared this. Not whoever stored it or hoarded it or preserved it, prepared it. The distinction feels important, though you can't quite grasp why. Voss begins portioning out the meat with ceremonial care, using his combat knife to carve precise slices that steam in the recycled air. The portions are generous, more generous than any ration you've received in months. Each piece is placed on whatever clean surfaces your squad has managed to scrounge. Mess kit plates, cleaned ammunition containers, even a few pieces of sheet metal that have been scrubbed to a mirror finish. Private Johnson would have loved this, Martinez says suddenly, his young voice carrying a note of melancholy that seems at odds with the festive atmosphere. Johnson. Right. Johnson went missing last week, MIA during a reconnaissance patrol into the Underhive. These things happen during extended sieges. Men get lost, get turned around in the endless maze of collapsed corridors and maintenance tunnels. Sometimes they find their way back. Sometimes they don't. The reports listed him as missing, presumed dead. Johnson's loss is our reminder, Voss says solemnly, holding up his portion. In the Emperor's service, we honor our fallen by continuing to serve, by taking sustenance so we can carry on their fight. The words feel ritualistic, formal in a way that makes your spine straighten involuntarily. Around the circle, your squadmates echo the sentiment with nods and murmurs of agreement. You find yourself nodding too, caught up in the moment despite the persistent nagging sensation that something isn't quite right. The first bite explodes across your taste buds with an intensity that makes you gasp. It's perfect. Rich and savory with an underlying sweetness that speaks of grain-fed protein, not the usual synthetic slurry that passes for nutrition in the Guard. The meat is tender enough to cut with your teeth but substantial enough to chew, releasing flavors with each bite that make your eyes water with relief. After weeks of hunger, after months of subsisting on compressed rations and recycled protein paste, this feels like redemption. But there's something else, something familiar about the taste that you can't quite place. It reminds you of, what? Childhood dinners, festival meals. That time when you were still a recruit and Sergeant Williams took the squad out for a proper celebration dinner after completing advanced training. Williams. When did you last see Williams? Your memory feels foggy, disconnected. Too much stress, too little food, too many losses. It's getting harder to keep track of who's here and who's gone. Around the circle, your squadmates are experiencing their own moments of transcendence. Kane closes his eyes while he chews, an expression of pure bliss spreading across his scarred features. Martinez actually makes small sounds of pleasure that would be embarrassing under any other circumstances. Even Voss, usually so controlled, allows himself a small smile of satisfaction. Emperor preserve us, someone whispers. You think it might be Private Tors, though when you look around the circle you don't see him. This is the best meal I've had since joining the Guard. The conversation flows more freely than it has in weeks. Stories of home, memories of better times, jokes that actually earn genuine laughter. The meat seems to have restored more than just your physical strength. It's brought back something you'd forgotten your squad possessed. Humanity. Fellowship. The bonds that keep soldiers functional when everything else falls apart. You find yourself laughing at one of Kane's increasingly elaborate war stories, the kind of tall tale that grows with each telling. The meat sits warm and satisfying in your stomach, the first time you felt truly full in longer than you care to remember. For a moment, just a moment, you can almost forget about the siege, about the losses, about the endless grinding horror of life in the 41st millennium. Almost. Because even as you laugh and share stories and feel your strength returning, that nagging sensation persists. Something about the way Voss found this meat. Something about the timing, right after Johnson disappeared. Something about the way Kane knew so much about proper preparation techniques. Something about how familiar this taste is, how it reminds you of people rather than places. You push the thoughts away. You have to. Because the alternative, the questions those thoughts might lead to, are not questions you're prepared to ask. Not when your belly is finally full. Not when your squad is finally bonding again. Not when you're finally remembering what it feels like to be human. The meal ends too soon, though your portion was larger than any you've received in months. As your squadmates begin cleaning their improvised plates and settling back into the routine of siege life, you find yourself looking at the cooking area with new eyes. The fat pooled in the bottom of the makeshift pans, the way Voss scraped every last bit of meat from the metal surfaces, the careful way he's wrapping the remaining portions for storage. Storage, for later, because there's more where this came from. Don't worry, Voss says, catching your gaze. There's something in his eyes you've never seen before, a kind of satisfied cunning that makes your skin crawl even as your stomach settles contentedly. This was just the beginning. I've found a reliable source. We won't go hungry again. As you settle back onto your cot, fuller and more satisfied than you've been in months, you try to hold onto the warmth and fellowship of the meal. But something cold is settling in your chest, something that tastes like doubt seasoned with a growing, terrible certainty. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but all you can taste is that familiar sweetness. All you can think about is how much this meal reminded you of better times, of better people, of people. And in the darkness behind your eyelids, you begin to wonder if Private Johnson really did get lost in those tunnels after all. You wake to the sound of distant artillery, a rhythm so constant over the past 4 months that it's become the heartbeat of your existence. Thump, thump, thump. Each explosion marks another day of the siege, another day cut off from the rest of the Imperium, another day closer to what? Victory, death. At this point, you're no longer certain there's a difference. The crone on your wrist reads 400 hours, but time has lost most of its meaning in the perpetual twilight of Hive World Tertius. The atmospheric processors failed 6 weeks into the siege, leaving the sky a perpetual orange-brown that filters sunlight into something weak and sickly. Day and night blend together in an endless cycle of survival, broken only by the distribution of what passes for rations and the occasional burst of violence when chaos cultists test your perimeter. If you can still call them chaos cultists. These days, you're not entirely sure who's fighting whom. 4 months ago, your regiment numbered nearly 3,000 men. The muster rolls were neat, organized things, companies and platoons arranged in perfect imperial order, each soldier accounted for, each position filled. You remember the pride in Colonel Vex's voice during the final inspection before deployment. The finest fighting force in the sector, he called you, ready to bring the Emperor's justice to any who dare oppose his will. The current muster roll fits on a single sheet of paper. Names crossed out in steady progression, casualties mounting with mathematical precision. Combat losses, equipment failures, accidents, disappearances. The neat categories of military bureaucracy struggling to contain the reality of slow attrition. 843 effectives remaining, but even that number feels optimistic. When did you last see anyone from 3rd Company? When did the Vox channels for 4th and 5th platoons go permanently silent? The command structure has collapsed into something resembling organized anarchy. Whoever has the highest rank in whatever room you happen to be standing in becomes the authority figure by default. Sergeant Voss has become your de facto commander, not through any official promotion, but through the simple expedient of being the highest-ranking non-commissioned officer who hasn't disappeared, died, or suffered what the medical corps politely terms severe psychological trauma. The fact that he's kept your squad fed, however questionably, has cemented his authority in ways that official rank never could. You've learned not to ask too many questions about his methods. The hunger is what broke the sieges back, though it took you weeks to understand the mechanics of it. In our world, starvation is a tragedy of logistics. Crops fail, supply chains break down, distribution systems collapse. People starve because food cannot reach them, not because someone actively prevents it from doing so. This is different. In the 41st millennium, hunger is a weapon as carefully crafted as any bolter or lascannon. The chaos cultists who surrounded your position didn't just cut your supply lines. They systematically destroyed every source of nutrition within a 100-kilometer radius. Food processing facilities bombed into slag. Water treatment plants contaminated with toxins that make the liquid glow with unnatural phosphorescence. Even the native wildlife, what little existed on this industrial nightmare of a world, poisoned or driven away. It's not enough for them to kill you quickly. They want you to understand that your survival depends on choices, and that all the available choices are unthinkable, unless you've learned to think differently about what constitutes acceptable. Private Martinez, sweet, innocent Martinez who still writes letters home to a mother who probably died in the orbital bombardment 3 months ago, has changed in ways that make your chest tight with something you refuse to acknowledge as fear. The boy who used to share his rations with wounded civilians now weighs every piece of food with the calculating precision of a merchant. He's learned to identify the caloric content of different proteins by sight, learned to estimate nutritional value with disturbing accuracy. You have to think strategically about consumption, he explained yesterday while examining his portion of meat. You've learned not to ask too many questions about what kind of meat. A gram of fat provides 9 calories, but protein only gives you 4. You need to balance immediate energy requirements against long-term metabolic needs. When did a 19-year-old from an agricultural world learn to talk like a nutrition specialist? When did his eyes develop that predatory glint when he looks at things? When did you stop thinking of him as innocent? Corporal Kane has always been pragmatic. 15 years in the Imperial Guard will teach you that survival trumps sentiment every time. But his pragmatism has evolved into something harder, colder. He speaks about resource allocation and efficiency optimization with the detached professionalism of a Departamento Munitorum logistics officer. Last week, you watched him sort through personal effects left behind by the disappeared, categorizing items by trade value with the same clinical efficiency he once applied to ammunition distribution. "Waste not, want not," he said when he caught you staring. "The dead have no use for these things. Better they serve the living." The dead? When did your missing squadmates become the dead rather than the missing? When did possibility transform into certainty? And Sergeant Voss has become something else entirely. The man who used to cite regulations and maintain proper military discipline now operates according to rules you don't recognize. He speaks in euphemisms that everyone understands but nobody acknowledges. Procurement operations, alternative supply chains, resource redistribution, maintaining unit cohesion through strategic nutrition management. The words sound official, bureaucratic, proper. They could appear in any Imperial Guard manual, and maybe they do. That thought keeps you awake at night. You've begun to notice patterns in the disappearances, not random selection. That would be easier to accept, easier to dismiss as the chaos of warfare. Instead, there's a logic to it, a systematic approach that suggests careful planning rather than desperate improvisation. The injured disappear first. Men with wounds that would require significant medical resources, soldiers whose mobility has been compromised, anyone whose capacity for military effectiveness has been permanently reduced. They're listed as medical evacuations in the official reports, transferred to better facilities that nobody can quite locate on any map. Then come the questioners, soldiers who ask too many questions about supply sources, who want to know where exactly Sergeant Voss conducts his procurement operations, who express concern about the gap between reported casualties and actual personnel reductions. They receive special assignments, solo reconnaissance missions, communications duty in isolated outposts, security details for facilities that may or may not exist. After that, it's simply a matter of mathematics. The weakest, the most isolated, the least connected. Men who join the unit as replacements and never fully integrated. Soldiers from other companies who attach themselves to your squad after their own command structure collapsed. Anyone whose absence wouldn't immediately disrupt unit cohesion or operational effectiveness. There's a waiting list, you realize with growing horror. Someone is maintaining a list. The official records tell a different story, of course. Combat casualties during patrol operations, equipment failures in hostile territory, accidental deaths during maintenance activities, missing in action during reconnaissance missions. Each entry properly documented, properly filed, properly forgotten. But the meat keeps appearing. Fresh protein with no clear source, no invoice deliveries, no documented supply requisitions. Just Sergeant Voss's assurances that he's found another cache, or established contact with civilian suppliers, or negotiated a favorable exchange with friendly units. You want to believe the explanations because the alternative is thinking about where fresh meat comes from when there are no animals left alive within 100 kilometers. It's thinking about why the meat always appears shortly after someone disappears. It's thinking about why you've developed such specific preferences about texture and flavor and preparation methods. It's thinking about why it tastes so familiar. The hierarchy of starvation manifests itself in portion sizes that follow military rank with religious precision. Officers, what few remain, receive the choicest cuts, the most tender portions, the largest servings. Non-commissioned officers like Voss get secondary selections, still generous but recognizably inferior to command rations. Enlisted personnel receive what's left, divided according to seniority, performance, and mysterious criteria that nobody discusses openly. And everybody accepts this as natural, proper, the way things should be. You find yourself calculating the caloric value of every person you encounter, estimating body mass and fat content with the same professional detachment you once applied to enemy target assessment. That new recruit from 8th Company who got separated from his unit, young, well-fed, probably weighs 65 kilos. The injured civilian who stumbled into your perimeter yesterday, older, tougher, but still substantial. The wounded communications specialist who's been lingering in the medical bay for 2 weeks, not much muscle mass, but the medical rations have kept him healthy. When did you start thinking this way? When did other people stop being people and start being potential? The prayers have changed too, though nobody acknowledges it directly. Morning devotions still follow proper imperial litany, still invoke the emperor's protection and guidance. But the emphasis has shifted. More requests for sustenance, more gratitude for provision, more acceptance of difficult choices in difficult times. The emperor provides for his faithful, Voss intones during morning prayer, and everyone responds with proper reverence. But the words carry weight they didn't possess 4 months ago. Implications that make your skin crawl even as your mouth waters. Provides what exactly, and how? Sometimes, in the quiet hours between shifts, you hear the sounds from the lower levels. Mechanical noises that could be equipment maintenance or food preparation. Rhythmic activities that happen with suspicious regularity. Conversations conducted in voices too low to understand, but carrying emotional tones that make your spine tingle with recognition. You've learned not to investigate those sounds. Curiosity, you've discovered, is a luxury you can no longer afford. The siege has taught you that civilization is a thin veneer over humanity's fundamental nature. Remove food security, Eliminate external authority, add enough desperation, and people will adapt to circumstances that would have been unthinkable months ago. They'll rationalize choices that would have once horrified them. They'll develop tastes for things they never imagined consuming. They'll learn to be grateful for provisions they're afraid to identify. And the most terrifying part isn't that this transformation happens. The most terrifying part is how natural it feels. How easily your mind creates categories and justifications and explanations that allow you to sleep at night. How readily you accept that survival requires compromise, and that the alternative to compromise is death. You roll over on your cot, trying to find a comfortable position on foam that gave up pretending to be supportive weeks ago. Your stomach rumbles with anticipation. Voss promised another procurement success for tonight's meal. Fresh protein, he assured you. High quality, properly prepared. You find yourself looking forward to it. And that, more than anything else, tells you exactly how far you've traveled from the soldier who first set foot on Hive World Tertius 4 months ago. That soldier would be horrified by the man lying on this cot, anticipating a meal whose source he's afraid to question. That soldier is probably already been consumed, in more ways than one. Outside, the artillery continues its endless rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. The heartbeat of a dying world, marking time until the next meal, the next disappearance, the next small step into darkness. You close your eyes and try to remember what it felt like to be human, but all you can think about is how tender tonight's dinner is going to be. The request comes at 200 hours, delivered with the casual authority that has become Sergeant Voss's trademark. Need some help with procurement today, he says, cleaning his combat knife with movements that seem more ritualistic than practical. You've got the stomach for necessary work. Stomach for necessary work. The phrase sits in your mind like lead shot, heavy and indigestible. When did you develop a reputation for having the stomach for anything beyond standard military operations? When did Voss decide you were trustworthy enough for whatever procurement actually entails? You want to refuse to claim duty assignments or medical issues or any excuse that would keep you in the relative safety of ignorance. But your stomach is already starting its familiar morning complaint, and the memory of last night's meal, that perfectly seasoned, mysteriously tender meat, makes your mouth water despite your growing unease. You need to know, not want to know, need to know. Because ignorance has become more terrifying than knowledge, even if that knowledge destroys something fundamental about your ability to sleep at night. Yes, Sergeant, you hear yourself saying. When do we begin? Voss's smile reveals teeth that have been meticulously cleaned, but still carry faint stains that no amount of scrubbing seems to remove. Now, soldier, the Emperor's work doesn't wait for convenient schedules. He leads you through passages you've never explored, maintenance corridors that branch off from the main hab complex into the darker regions of the Underhive. The emergency lighting died weeks ago, leaving only the pale glow of Voss's luminator to guide your descent into whatever lies beneath civilized society. The architecture changes as you descend. Imperial construction gives way to older designs, pre-conquest structures that predate humanity's arrival on Tertius. The walls develop an organic quality that makes your skin crawl, too smooth, too curved, like the interior of something that was once alive. Your footsteps echo in ways that suggest vast spaces beyond the reach of your light. First rule of procurement, Voss says conversationally, his voice carrying the tone of a veteran instructor sharing trade secrets. Location is everything. You need somewhere isolated enough for privacy but accessible enough for transport. Somewhere with good drainage and adequate ventilation. Somewhere nobody visits without invitation. Drainage. The word lodges in your throat like a bone. What kind of procurement requires drainage? The smell hits you long before you see its source. A rich copper tang mixed with something sweet and organic that makes every instinct in your body scream warnings. It's the smell of the Underhive's recycling systems, of biological waste processing, of life being broken down into its constituent components. It's the smell of an abattoir. Here we are, Voss announces with the pride of a man showing off his workshop. My procurement facility. The chamber that opens before you was clearly designed for industrial food processing. Massive metal tables, drainage systems built into sloped floors, hooks and chains hanging from reinforced ceiling mounts. Equipment that could have come from any agricultural world's meat-packing facility, repurposed for what? What does imperial food processing look like when the food isn't officially food? When the food used to be people? Your legs threat to give out as the reality crashes over you like ice water. This isn't scavenging or hoarding or even black market trading. This is systematic, organized, industrial processing of human beings for consumption. The missing soldiers, the disappeared civilians, the countless minor characters in your unit's ongoing tragedy, they didn't vanish into the chaos of warfare. They became dinner. I can see you're having some philosophical difficulties, Voss observes with the casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns. That's normal. Most people need time to adjust their thinking about resource utilization. But once you understand the logic, it becomes quite simple. He gestures toward the metal tables with movements that suggest long familiarity with the space. The Emperor provides for his faithful, but sometimes his providence requires active participation. Sometimes we must take responsibility for our own salvation. Providence. The word makes your stomach turn even as another part of your mind, a part you're terrified to acknowledge, begins calculating the efficiency of the operation. Multiple tables for parallel processing, drainage systems to handle waste disposal, storage areas that maintain proper temperature. This isn't desperate improvisation, this is professional. Where do they come from? You ask, though part of you already knows the answer. Everywhere, Voss replies with a shrug. Civilians who wander into our territory looking for protection, soldiers from other units who request temporary attachment, wounded personnel who require too many resources to maintain, anyone whose continued existence represents inefficient resource allocation. He moves to one of the storage areas and retrieves something wrapped in clean cloth. Too clean. When did anyone in your unit have access to clean cloth? When did Voss develop such meticulous standards of hygiene? The key is selection criteria, he continues, unwrapping what appears to be a collection of cutting tools that gleam with professional sharpness. Age, body composition, muscle development, fat distribution. You need to think like a buyer evaluating livestock, rather than a soldier counting personnel. Livestock. The word hits you like a physical blow. That's what people have become in Voss's worldview, livestock to be evaluated, selected, processed, and consumed. The complex calculations you've been unconsciously performing, estimating weight and nutritional value and protein content, weren't random thoughts. They were shopping lists. Take our recent addition from communications, Voss says, moving to another storage area. Private Henderson. Excellent body composition, minimal injury history, optimal age for tenderness. Been on medical rations for 2 weeks, which improves the quality considerably. Henderson. You remember Henderson, eager young man from a forge world, always talking about the girl he planned to marry after his tour of duty. Volunteered for dangerous assignments because he wanted to earn commendation letters to send home. Last seen 3 days ago, supposedly transferred to another unit for specialized communications work. He's been hanging in Voss's cold storage for 3 days. The processing itself is straightforward. Voss continues with the detached professionalism of a technical instructor. Standard butchery techniques apply, major muscle groups separated first, organs removed and sorted by utility, bones cleaned for stock preparation. The key is maintaining sanitary conditions throughout the process. He demonstrates with movements that speak of extensive practice. Clinical precision that reduces human beings to component parts, organized by nutritional value and preparation requirements. Henderson, enthusiastic, love-struck Henderson who carried pictures of his betrothed in his breast pocket, has become cuts of meat categorized by cooking time and seasoning compatibility. You find yourself taking notes, not literally, Your hands remain at your sides, trembling with shock and revulsion. But some part of your mind is cataloging the information, storing the technical details, preparing for future applications. The same part that's been unconsciously evaluating every person you encounter for weeks. The part that's already accepted this as necessary. Quality control is essential, Voss explains, moving to what appears to be a preparation area. Proper aging improves tenderness. Salt curing extends storage life. Appropriate portioning ensures equitable distribution according to rank and contribution. The preparation area contains packages wrapped in material you recognize as requisition forms, standard imperial bureaucracy repurposed as butcher paper. Each package is labeled with codes that mean nothing to you but clearly represent systematic categorization to Voss. How long has this been happening? How many meals have you consumed without understanding their source? The beauty of the system, Voss continues, is its self-sustaining nature. Each procurement operation provides enough nutrition to maintain unit strength for the next operation. Waste nothing, want nothing. Perfect imperial efficiency. Perfect imperial efficiency. The phrase makes your skin crawl because it does sound like something from an official manual. The kind of bureaucratic language that transforms horror into policy, that makes the unthinkable sound like proper resource management. But the reports, you begin, struggling to form coherent thoughts around the growing certainty that everything you believed about your unit's situation has been carefully constructed fiction. Combat casualties, Voss replies with a dismissive gesture. Equipment failures. Accidental deaths, missing in action. The paperwork practically writes itself. Command expects losses during extended siege conditions. As long as the forms are properly filed, nobody asks uncomfortable questions. Nobody asks uncomfortable questions. Because questioning the official narrative might lead to discoveries that would make continued operations impossible, might force people to confront choices they've already made but refuse to acknowledge, might reveal that everyone already knows and has simply agreed not to discuss it. The first time is always difficult, Voss says, his voice taking on an almost fatherly tone. But you'll find it becomes routine surprisingly quickly. The human mind is remarkably adaptable when survival is at stake. He hands you one of the cutting tools, a knife designed for precision work, balanced for extended use, maintained with professional care. The handle fits your grip as if it was designed specifically for your hand, as if Voss has been planning this moment for some time. Tonight's procurement is already selected, he explains, moving toward what appears to be a holding area. Young Martinez from 3rd Squad, optimal age, excellent conditioning, been on supplemental rations for proper preparation, should provide enough protein for the entire unit. Martinez, sweet, innocent Martinez who still writes letters to his dead mother, who shares his rations with wounded civilians, who's been asking too many questions about where the meat comes from, who trusted you enough to confide his growing suspicions about the unit's supply sources. He's not actually from our squad, you hear yourself saying, though you're not sure why that distinction matters. Attached personnel, Voss clarifies with bureaucratic precision. Temporary assignment for specialized training. Perfect for procurement purposes. Minimal unit disruption. Simplified paperwork. No long-term relationship complications. Relationship complications. Because it's easier to butcher someone you don't know well. Easier to process them into anonymous protein if you haven't shared stories and jokes, and the small intimacies that make people human to each other. The holding area contains a single figure secured with restraints that appear designed for this specific purpose. Martinez is unconscious but breathing, his face peaceful in a way that makes your chest tighten with something you refuse to acknowledge as grief. He looks so young. Standard procedure is to maintain unconsciousness throughout processing. Voss explains with clinical detachment. More humane for the procurement, less traumatic for the processor. Everyone benefits from professional methodology. Humane. The word feels like blasphemy in this context, but you find yourself nodding anyway, because if this is going to happen, and some part of you has already accepted that it is, then surely it's better to minimize suffering. Better to maintain some pretense of civilization even while discarding everything that makes civilization possible. Your role today is observational, Voss continues. Learn the procedures, understand the methodology, develop comfort with the necessary techniques. Tomorrow you'll take more active participation. Tomorrow. There's going to be a tomorrow, and another day after that, and an endless succession of days during which you'll participate in the systematic reduction of human beings to meat products, during which you'll develop preferences and expertise and professional pride in work that would have horrified you mere hours ago, during which you'll become something other than human yourself. You watch as Voss prepares his tools with ritualistic precision, each implement arranged according to function and sequence of use. The movements are practiced, efficient, respectful in their own horrifying way. This isn't sadistic brutality, it's craftwork. Professional butchery performed with the same attention to detail that characterized Voss's military service. The same attention to detail that's kept your squad fed and functional when every other unit in the sector has collapsed into dysfunction or death. Questions? Voss asks, glancing at you with the expectant air of an instructor checking for comprehension. You have thousands of questions about morality and humanity and the point at which survival stops being worth the cost, about the difference between civilization and organized barbarism, about whether the person standing in this chamber can still claim to serve the emperor of mankind when he's about to participate in activities that would make chaos cultists vomit. But what you ask is, what's the yield ratio on someone Martinez's size? Voss smiles with genuine approval. Excellent question. Approximately 35% usable protein after processing, enough for 14 generous portions or 22 standard rations, plus organ meat for stock preparation and bone material for calcium supplements. 35%. Martinez has been reduced to mathematical efficiency before his heart has even stopped beating. You find yourself nodding as if this information makes perfect sense, as if reducing human beings to yield percentages is a reasonable approach to resource management. As if you're already thinking like Voss thinks. The first cut is surprisingly quiet, just a soft sound like fabric tearing, followed by the rhythmic dripping that speaks of professional precision. Martinez doesn't wake up, doesn't struggle, doesn't even seem to realize that his brief, hopeful life is ending in an industrial processing facility beneath a dying hive world. He just becomes meat, and you stand there watching, taking mental notes about technique and efficiency, already planning how you'll explain his disappearance to the rest of the squad, already categorizing his personal effects for redistribution, already wondering who might be selected for tomorrow's procurement operation, already hungry for tonight's dinner. By the time you return to the upper levels, you understand that you've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. You've become complicit in something that transforms you into an entirely different category of being. Not human, not exactly inhuman, but something new, something adapted to survival in circumstances that shouldn't allow survival at all. Something that serves the emperor by consuming his faithful. Something that tastes like victory seasoned with damnation. Memory is a fragile thing, you've discovered, especially when remembering threatens to make continued existence impossible. But tonight, sitting in the pale glow of emergency lighting while savoring what Sergeant Voss assures you is premium protein from reliable sources, the memories come flooding back with crystalline clarity, and you finally understand what you've been eating. It starts with Private Chen, eager, optimistic Chen, who used to regale the squad with stories about his family's noodle shop back on Cadia Prime. Chen, who volunteered for every dangerous assignment because he wanted to earn enough commendation pay to expand his father's business. Chen, who disappeared during what the official reports listed as a routine perimeter patrol exactly 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. The same week Sergeant Voss announced he'd established contact with reliable civilian suppliers. The timing should have been obvious, but hunger has a way of making obvious things invisible. Survival instincts override pattern recognition when acknowledging patterns might interfere with continued nutrition. Your mind protects itself by refusing to make connections that would make eating impossible. But now, the connections are making themselves. You chew slowly, rolling the meat around your tongue with the same analytical attention you've developed over the past month. The flavor is complex, slightly sweet, with a mineral undertone that speaks of someone who maintained proper hydration despite siege conditions. The texture is tender but substantial, suggesting youth combined with regular physical conditioning. Just like Chen, young, fit, properly hydrated because he was always careful about his water ration consumption. The realization makes your throat close, but you force yourself to swallow anyway. Because what's the alternative? Spit out the first substantial nutrition you've had in days. Starve rather than acknowledge what survival actually costs. Or is it already too late for moral stands? Have you already consumed too much humanity to claim any high ground? Corporal Kane sits across from you, working through his own portion with the methodical efficiency that characterizes everything he does. But there's something different about his approach tonight. A reverence that goes beyond simple gratitude for sustenance. He chews with his eyes closed, as if trying to extract memories along with nutrients. "This one had good instincts," he says suddenly, his voice carrying an odd mixture of respect and regret. "Remember how he always knew when to duck during artillery barrages. Natural sense of timing. Kept a lot of people alive with that intuition." Had past tense. Kane is talking about Chen in past tense, acknowledging his death while simultaneously consuming his flesh. The casual way he discusses their dead squadmate's virtues while literally digesting him makes your stomach churn, but not enough to stop eating. Nothing seems to be enough to stop eating anymore. "Chen saved my life twice," Private Martinez adds, though his voice lacks its usual emotional resonance. Martinez has been changing over the past few weeks, developing the same clinical detachment that seems to affect everyone who stays in the unit long enough. Once during that mortar attack on the supply depot, once when he spotted those cultist infiltrators. Good man, good soldier. Good protein, you think. And the fact that such thoughts now occur naturally terrifies you more than anything else about your current situation. The conversation continues around the circle, each member of your diminished squad sharing memories of Chen's service, his personality, his dreams for post-war life. It feels like a memorial service, a proper recognition of a fallen comrade's contributions. But you're eulogizing him while literally consuming his remains, honoring his memory by digesting his muscle tissue. It's the most respectful cannibalism you can imagine. "Week before last was Hayes," Kane continues, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality of someone reciting a familiar litany. "Good with communications equipment. Could fix a Voxcaster with spare parts and prayer. Tough as Grok's hide but surprisingly tender when properly prepared." Surprisingly tender. Kane discusses their former squadmates' meat quality with the same professional assessment he once applied to equipment evaluation. Hayes, reliable, competent Hayes who always volunteered for technical assignments, has been reduced to culinary evaluation. And you find yourself nodding in agreement because the meat was particularly tender that week. Better than usual, premium quality that made the entire squad more energetic and optimistic for several days afterward. Hayes kept you all functional even after his death, even after his transformation into nutrition. Then Johnson, Martinez adds, his voice developing that dreamy quality people get when discussing transcendent experiences. Johnson was different, grain-fed, I think. Lived on one of those agricultural worlds before joining the Guard. You could taste the difference, sweeter, more complex flavor profile. Best meal we'd had since the siege started. Johnson, you remember Johnson now with startling clarity. Farm boy from Agri-World Secundus, always talking about harvest seasons and crop rotation. Big, solid, healthy in the way that only comes from a lifetime of proper nutrition and physical labor. The kind of health that translates directly into superior protein quality. "I miss Johnson," someone says. You think it might be Tors, though when you look around the circle you don't see Tors anywhere. When did Tors disappear? How long has it been since you've seen him? More than a week, you realize. Long enough for proper processing and distribution. The revelation should horrify you, but instead you find yourself trying to remember what Tors tasted like, trying to identify which recent meals might have contained his remains, wondering if his disappearance explains why last week's rations were particularly satisfying, wondering if you'll miss Tors the person or Tors the protein source more. The twins from communications were interesting. Voss contributes from his position at the head of your makeshift dining area. Brothers, you know. Similar genetics, similar muscle development, but different flavor profiles, probably due to dietary variations before military service, educational from a culinary perspective. The twins, Jorik and Valdris, identical siblings who finished each other's sentences and shared everything from rations to combat assignments, listed as lost in tunnel collapse 3 weeks ago, though nobody ever found the tunnel or investigated the collapse, because there was no tunnel, there was no collapse, there was only Voss's procurement operation expanding to handle larger-scale processing. You try to remember eating the twins, but the memories blur together. Too many meals, too many sources, too much adaptation to circumstances that should be impossible to adapt to. But you remember the abundance of that weak, generous portions, variety in preparation, the feeling of being genuinely well-fed for the first time in months, the feeling of consuming an entire family. Sergeant Williams from 3rd Squad was probably the most challenging, Kane observes, his analytical mind cataloging technical difficulties the way he once evaluated equipment problems. Older, tougher muscle fibers, extensive scar tissue from previous combat injuries, required longer preparation time but produced excellent stock for soup base. Williams, career soldier with 23 years of service, veteran of 6 major campaigns, holder of the Medallion Crimson for extraordinary valor, reduced to soup stock because his meat was too tough for direct consumption. You slurp that soup with genuine appreciation, savoring every drop of a decorated hero's liquefied remains. The litany continues around the circle, names and memories and culinary assessments blending together into a catalog of consumption that spans weeks of systematic cannibalism. Each disappeared squadmate accounted for, each death explained, each meal connected to its human source, and everyone participating in the discussion as if this is normal, proper, the natural order of military life. Peterson was wasteful. Martinez complains with the irritation of someone discussing poor resource management. Too much gristle, insufficient fat content. Should have been used for jerky preparation instead of direct consumption. Peterson, the supply clerk who always complained about irregular deliveries and inadequate provisions. Ironic that his death became a delivery and his body became provisions, though apparently not very good ones. You remember being disappointed with that week's rations. Now you know why. The civilian woman who wandered into our perimeter last month was exceptional, Voss adds with the tone of someone sharing professional secrets. Civilian nutrition standards, no combat stress affecting muscle development, optimal age and body composition. Premium quality that's difficult to source under current conditions. The civilian woman, you remember her, middle-aged, desperate, looking for her missing daughter in the ruins of the Hive City. She begged for protection, offered to work in exchange for shelter and safety. Voss assured her that the Emperor provided for all his faithful. He wasn't lying. The Emperor did provide for her. She became provision. Her daughter was less satisfactory, Kane notes with clinical disappointment. Too young, insufficient muscle development, but acceptable for soup preparation. Her daughter, a girl maybe 14 years old, terrified and starving, clinging to her mother with the desperate hope that Imperial soldiers would represent salvation rather than predation. You consumed a child. You consumed a mother and daughter together, breaking down their bodies for nutrition while their love for each other became seasoning. The realization should break something inside you, some fundamental barrier between civilization and savagery, some essential component of humanity that makes continued existence possible. But instead, you find yourself thinking about optimal age ranges for different types of preparation, about the relationship between emotional stress and meat quality, about whether separated families might be processed together for psychological reasons, about whether you're developing professional standards for activities that shouldn't have standards at all. The beauty of the system, Voss explains with pedagogical pride, is its completeness. Nothing wasted, everyone honored, all needs met through efficient resource utilization. The dead continue to serve the emperor by sustaining the living. Continue to serve, as if consumption is just another form of military duty, another way to contribute to imperial victory. As if cannibalism is simply extended service rather than the complete abandonment of everything the Imperium claims to represent. But maybe that's exactly what it is. Maybe this is what imperial service looks like when all pretense has been stripped away. Maybe the Imperium has always been a machine that consumes its own people, and you're just experiencing the process more directly than most. Maybe you're finally understanding what it really means to serve humanity by serving the Imperium of man. You look around the circle at your remaining squad mates, Kane with his analytical approach to human consumption, Martinez with his increasingly clinical detachment from human connection, Voss with his systematic conversion of people into provisions. Each of them adapting to circumstances that shouldn't allow adaptation, developing skills that shouldn't exist, finding meaning in activities that should destroy meaning. Each of them becoming something that can survive in the 41st millennium by consuming everything that made survival worthwhile. Who's next? You ask, though you're not sure why that question emerges from your mouth. Perhaps because the logical progression of the system demands continued procurement. Perhaps because your stomach is already anticipating future meals. Perhaps because you've accepted that survival requires someone else's death, and you want to know whose life will sustain yours. Perhaps because you're already thinking like a predator, evaluating prey. Voss's smile reveals teeth stained with the residue of systematic cannibalism. That depends on operational requirements and availability of suitable candidates. But don't worry, the Emperor provides for his faithful. There's always someone whose continued existence represents inefficient resource allocation. Always someone, including eventually you. Because the system is perfect in its logic, everyone is both consumer and consumed, predator and prey, survivor and sacrifice. The only question is timing. The only question is whether you'll recognize the signs when they start evaluating you for procurement. You finish your portion of Chen, sweet, optimistic Chen who dreamed of expanding his family's noodle shop, and find yourself already hungry for tomorrow's meal. Already wondering who might be selected for processing. Already evaluating your remaining squad mates for caloric content and preparation requirements. Already understanding that you're no longer capable of seeing people as anything other than potential nutrition. The feast continues around you, but the fellowship has a different quality now. Not the bonding of soldiers sharing hardship, but the communion of predators sharing prey. Not the celebration of survival, but the ritual consumption of everything that once made survival meaningful. In his name, you feast, and with each bite, you become something that serves the Emperor by devouring his faithful. The prayers begin at 5:30 hours, same as they have every morning for the past 4 months. But the words carry different weight now that you understand what daily bread actually means in your unit's operational context. The familiar litanies of imperial devotion take on layers of meaning that make your skin crawl even as your mouth waters in anticipation of breakfast. Emperor of mankind, protector of humanity, provider for the faithful, Sergeant Voss intones with the same ceremonial gravity he's maintained since the siege began. But his voice carries undertones of satisfaction that weren't present during those first desperate weeks, back when starvation was a threat rather than a solution, back when you were consumers rather than consumed. The response comes automatically from the assembled remnants of your squad. We thank you for your providence and ask for strength to serve your will. Standard imperial liturgy that appears in every regimental manual, approved by the ecclesiarchy, sanctioned by centuries of military tradition. Words that mean something entirely different when your service involves systematically devouring the faithful. You kneel on the cold metal floor alongside your squad mates, hands clasped in the approved position for morning devotion, eyes closed in appropriate reverence. But behind your eyelids, images flash with disturbing clarity, meat hooks gleaming in emergency lighting, drainage systems designed for efficient waste disposal, cutting tools arranged with surgical precision. The tools of devotion, the instruments of providence. Blessed be those who serve the emperors will through sacrifice. Voss continues, his words taking on ritualistic cadence that transforms the prayers from routine recitation into something approaching liturgical ceremony. May their offering sustain those who continue the fight against the enemies of mankind. Offering, when did disappeared squadmates become offerings? When did murder become sacrifice? When did cannibalism become a form of religious observance? The answer sits heavy in your stomach like undigested meat, the moment you needed it to mean something other than horror. The moment you required moral framework to justify continued consumption. The moment you discovered that the human mind can sanctify anything if the alternative is acknowledging participation in the unsanctifiable. The moment you learned to pray while dining on human flesh. Private Chen, Voss intones, his voice taking on the reverent tone reserved for honoring the fallen, gave his life that others might continue serving the emperor's will. His sacrifice sustains us in body and spirit. Around the circle, your squadmates respond with murmurs of appreciation that sound disturbingly similar to the grateful acknowledgement of a well-prepared meal. Because that's exactly what Chen has become, not a tragic loss, not a fallen comrade, not a human being whose life was cut short by circumstances beyond his control. A successful procurement operation. A source of sustenance. A spiritual offering that happened to taste particularly good when properly seasoned. Corporal Hayes, the litany continues, offered his technical expertise in life and continues offering nourishment in death. Through consumption, we honor his contribution to our continued mission. Through consumption, we honor. The phrase makes your throat close even as saliva floods your mouth. Because honoring Hayes through consumption actually feels meaningful, feels right in a way that terrifies you more than simple cannibalism ever could. It feels like proper religious observance. The prayers continue through the catalog of your consumed. Johnson with his agricultural world sweetness, the twins with their educational flavor profiles, Williams with his excellent stock potential. Each name spoken with genuine reverence, each death acknowledged as meaningful contribution to the unit's survival, each person transformed from tragedy into sacrament. We give thanks for these provisions, you hear yourself saying along with the others, the words emerging automatically despite your growing understanding of their implications. We accept these gifts with gratitude and humility, knowing that we too shall serve the emperor's will through our own eventual sacrifice. Our own eventual sacrifice. Because the system is perfect in its symmetry, everyone is both communicant and communion, consumer and consumed, predator and prey. The only question is timing, and timing is determined by operational efficiency rather than sentiment. You are thanking the emperor for human flesh while acknowledging that your own flesh will someday feed others. The breakfast preparation begins immediately after prayers, conducted with ceremonial attention to detail that transforms cooking into liturgical performance. Voss handles the meat with reverence appropriate for sacred objects, his movements precise and ritualistic, as he portions out what your records indicate was formerly Private Henderson from Communications. Henderson, who wrote poetry in his spare time and dreamed of publishing a collection after his military service ended. The meat sizzles in the improvised cooking vessels with sounds that might be prayers or might be screams, releasing aromatic smoke that carries the essence of Henderson's hopes and dreams and unrealized potential. You breathe deeply, allowing the scent to fill your lungs with what feels like spiritual communion. You are inhaling Henderson's soul. The preparation itself is an act of devotion, Voss explains as he tends the cooking process with priestly attention. Proper temperature, appropriate seasoning, careful timing, each element contributes to honoring the sacrifice through optimal consumption. Optimal consumption. Because Henderson deserves to be eaten well, eaten properly, eaten with the respect due to someone who has given his life, however involuntarily, for the continued survival of his squadmates. Because poor preparation would be disrespectful to his memory. The distribution follows strict hierarchical protocols that mirror both military rank and religious significance. Voss receives the choicest portion, not because of greed, but because his leadership role requires optimal nutrition to maintain decision-making capacity. Kane gets secondary selection, his experience and tactical knowledge making him too valuable to allow nutritional deficiency. You receive a portion sized according to your contribution to the unit's operational effectiveness. But the most disturbing aspect isn't the hierarchy itself, it's how natural it feels. How obviously correct it seems that resources should be allocated according to utility and rank. How readily you accept that Henderson's sacrifice should benefit the unit according to established Imperial order. How grateful you are to receive any portion of Henderson at all. The communion aspect is essential, Kane observes as the squad settles into their eating positions. Individual consumption is just feeding. Shared consumption becomes spiritual ceremony, bonds the unit through mutual participation in sacred mystery. Sacred mystery. Henderson has been transformed from person to sacrament. His flesh become the literal body of Imperial service. His death become the spiritual foundation for continued resistance against the enemies of mankind. You are participating in a form of communion that would make the ecclesiarchy vomit. The first bite floods your mouth with flavors that seem more complex than simple protein, traces of Henderson's personality, his dreams, his humanity distilled into consumable form. You chew slowly, reverently, allowing each element to register before swallowing. It tastes like salvation seasoned with damnation. Henderson was always meticulous about equipment maintenance, Martinez observes around a mouthful of carefully chewed flesh. You can taste the discipline in his muscle development. Good eating habits, regular exercise, proper hydration protocol. You can taste the discipline, because Henderson's character traits have somehow survived his transformation into meat, adding psychological seasoning to the physical nourishment. His virtues have become flavors, his personality has become spice. You are literally digesting his soul. The conversation flows easily around topics that should be impossible to discuss while engaging in activities that should be impossible to perform. Technical evaluation of meat quality, appreciation for proper preparation methods, speculation about optimal procurement strategies, all delivered in tones of casual professionalism that make systematic cannibalism sound like routine military logistics. All conducted while consuming someone you knew personally, someone whose jokes you laughed at, someone whose fears you understood. The psychological benefits are as important as nutritional ones, Voss contributes, his fork pausing midway to his mouth as he makes his point. Shared consumption creates bonds stronger than simple military discipline, creates loyalty based on mutual complicity rather than external authority. Mutual complicity, because everyone around this circle is equally guilty, equally dependent on continued cannibalism for survival, equally committed to maintaining the system that keeps them fed. No one can report the others without condemning themselves. No one can escape without starving. No one can claim moral superiority because everyone has Henderson's blood on their teeth. It's actually quite elegant, Kane adds with the analytical appreciation he brings to all complex systems. Traditional military structure depends on hierarchical authority imposed from above. This creates horizontal bonds through shared necessity, more stable, more sustainable. More sustainable, because the system generates its own fuel through systematic consumption of its participants. Every disappearance creates nutrition for the survivors. Every death strengthens the bonds between the living. Every act of cannibalism makes the next act easier to rationalize. Perfect imperial efficiency applied to human resource management. The spiritual dimensions are equally significant, Martinez contributes, his voice taking on the dreamy quality that's become his characteristic tone during meals. Traditional imperial faith requires belief in abstractions, the emperor's protection, the righteousness of human supremacy, the meaning of sacrifice for distant goals. This provides immediate, tangible proof of divine providence. Tangible proof, because Henderson's flesh in your mouth is undeniable evidence that the emperor provides for his faithful. That service is rewarded with sustenance. That faith is answered with nourishment. That the emperor's providence works through the systematic consumption of his faithful. You swallow another portion of Henderson, earnest, poetic Henderson who wanted to publish verses about the beauty he found in military service, and feel his substance becoming part of your body, his essence merging with your blood, his sacrifice enabling your continued existence, his humanity becoming your inhumanity. The beauty is that it eliminates waste. Voss explains with the satisfaction of someone who has solved a complex logistical problem. Traditional military operations accept casualty rates as inevitable inefficiency. This transforms casualties into resources, converts losses into gains. Converts losses into gains. Because Henderson hasn't been lost, he's been converted from expensive personnel requiring resources into valuable resources, providing sustenance. His death represents operational improvement rather than tactical failure. His murder becomes a management success story. Every procurement operation makes the unit stronger, Kane agrees, his scarred face showing genuine enthusiasm for systematic optimization. Better fed, more cohesive, more committed to operational security. Perfect positive feedback loop. Perfect positive feedback loop. Because the better fed the unit becomes, the more effective their procurement operations. The more effective their procurement operations, the better fed they become. The better fed they become, the more they require continued procurement to maintain their improved condition. The more they require fresh meat, the more efficiently they can acquire it. You look around the circle at your squad mates, fewer in number than last month, better fed than they've been in months, more unified in purpose than any military unit you've ever served with. Each face shows the satisfaction that comes from proper nutrition combined with spiritual fulfillment. Each face shows the transformation that comes from regular participation in systematic cannibalism. Henderson would have understood, Martinez says suddenly, his voice carrying conviction that surprises you with its sincerity. He was always talking about duty, about service, about finding meaning in sacrifice. This is exactly what he would have wanted, his death serving a greater purpose. His death serving a greater purpose. Because Henderson's murder has been retroactively justified by the spiritual meaning your squad has extracted from consuming his remains. His unwilling sacrifice has been transformed into voluntary offering through the alchemy of necessity and religious interpretation. He would have wanted this. He would have been honored to become your dinner. The meal concludes with prayers of gratitude that feel more sincere than any religious observance you've participated in since childhood. Because the blessings are immediate, tangible, undeniably real, the Emperor has provided Henderson's flesh for your sustenance. The Emperor has strengthened your unit through Henderson's sacrifice. The Emperor has demonstrated his love through Henderson's transformation into communion. The Emperor has fed you human meat and somehow made it feel like salvation. In Henderson's name, we give thanks, Voss concludes the post-meal prayers. Through his sacrifice, we continue serving the Emperor's will. Through his sacrifice, we serve, the squad responds in unison, and the words feel like binding oath rather than simple acknowledgement. Because they are binding oath. You have sworn to continue serving through continued consumption, to honor the sacrificed by adding to their number, to maintain the system that transforms people into provisions. You bow your head in final prayer, Henderson's flesh warm in your stomach, Henderson's essence flowing through your bloodstream, Henderson's sacrifice enabling your continued existence in service to the God Emperor of mankind. And for the first time since this began, the prayers feel answered, not because some distant divine authority has acknowledged your devotion, but because the communion itself has created meaning where none existed before. Because the systematic consumption of your squadmates has become a form of religious observance that provides spiritual satisfaction along with physical nourishment. Because cannibalism has become sacrament, and sacrament has made cannibalism sacred. Outside, the artillery continues its endless rhythm, marking time until the next procurement operation, the next sacred meal, the next opportunity to serve the Emperor through the consumption of his faithful. Thump, thump, thump. The heartbeat of a dying world, counting down to your own eventual transformation from communicant to communion. And you find yourself looking forward to both roles with equal devotion. The realization creeps over you with the slow horror of poison working through your bloodstream. You're standing in the unit's makeshift barracks, ostensibly organizing equipment for tomorrow's patrol, but actually engaging in an activity that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. You're evaluating your squadmates for caloric content. The process happens automatically now, your mind calculating body mass and fat distribution, with the clinical precision of a Departamento Munitorum supply officer managing inventory. Private Martinez, approximately 62 kilograms, optimal muscle development, minimal scar tissue that would affect meat quality. Corporal Kane, 78 kilograms, older and tougher but excellent protein density from years of military conditioning. When did human beings stop being people and start being potential meals? The answer is as disturbing as the question. Gradually, inevitably, so slowly that each step felt natural until you arrived at a destination that should have been impossible to reach. Like learning a language through immersion, your mind has absorbed the vocabulary of cannibalism until thinking in terms of procurement and yield ratios requires no conscious effort, until seeing people as food feels more natural than seeing them as people. You're adapting well to our operational requirements, Sergeant Voss observes, his voice carrying approval that makes your chest warm with pride. Pride that you immediately recognize as horrifying but can't quite bring yourself to reject, because approval from the unit's most successful procurement specialist represents professional validation. You try to focus on your equipment maintenance, checking power cell charges and cleaning weapon components with the methodical attention that military service has drilled into your bones. But your eyes keep drifting to your squadmates, your mind automatically cataloging details that have nothing to do with their military effectiveness. Martinez has been receiving supplemental rations for the past week, additional protein that has improved his muscle tone and added beneficial fat layers. Kane has been assigned to lighter duties that preserve his physical condition while maintaining his tactical readiness. Even your own daily routine has been subtly modified in ways that suggest systematic preparation for something you're afraid to acknowledge. Someone is optimizing the unit for maximum yield. The thought makes your hands shake as you work on your lasgun's focusing array, but not enough to affect your technical precision. Because even terror has become routine, another environmental factor to adapt to rather than a signal to change behavior. Your mind has developed the same compartmentalization that allows soldiers to function during extended combat operations. The same compartmentalization that allows you to continue living, while understanding that you're being prepared for systematic consumption. Inventory assessment is crucial for effective resource management. Voss continues, moving through the barracks with the predatory grace that has characterized his movements since taking operational control of procurement activities. You need to understand what assets are available and plan allocation accordingly. Assets, Your squad mates have become assets to be allocated rather than people to be protected. The transformation in language reflects a deeper shift in perspective that makes continued operations possible. That makes continued cannibalism feel like proper military logistics. You notice Kane watching Martinez with the same analytical attention you've been applying, his weathered features showing the calculating expression he once reserved for tactical planning. There's something unsettling about seeing that level of professional assessment directed at a human being, something that makes your stomach clench with recognition, because you've been wearing the same expression while evaluating Kane. The psychological preparation is as important as physical conditioning, Kane observes, his voice carrying the pedagogical tone he uses when sharing technical expertise. Mental stress effects meet quality significantly. Better to maintain subjects in conditions of comfortable ignorance until processing becomes necessary. Subjects. Martinez has been transformed from squadmate to subject, a term that reduces human beings to experimental material while maintaining the pretense of scientific objectivity. The same objectivity that allows you to evaluate him for nutritional content without feeling like a monster. Martinez himself seems oblivious to the scrutiny, busying himself with letter-writing activities that have become increasingly elaborate over the past week. He's been composing what he describes as his final correspondence home, detailed messages to family members explaining his experiences and expressing his devotion to Imperial service. Letters that will never be sent because Martinez will never survive to send them. The irony is that Martinez is producing exactly the kind of content that families of deceased soldiers receive: heartfelt testimonials to duty and sacrifice, expressions of love and hope, assurances that their service has meaning beyond mere survival. The only difference is that Martinez is writing his own memorial correspondence while being prepared for consumption by the people he considers his brothers in arms. He's writing his own eulogy while being fattened for slaughter. Youth provides optimal protein profiles, Voss explains with clinical detachment, though his eyes maintain the hungry focus of a predator evaluating prey. Limited exposure to combat stress, minimal accumulated injuries, excellent metabolic efficiency from proper genetic screening. Genetic screening. The Imperial Guard's recruitment process suddenly takes on sinister implications, not just selecting for military effectiveness, but for meat quality. The same physical standards that make good soldiers apparently make good protein sources. The same screening that selected you for both roles. You find yourself wondering about your own evaluation metrics. What criteria led to your inclusion in the unit's long-term survival planning? What combination of usefulness and expendability determines whether someone becomes consumer or consumed? What signs should you be watching for to know when your status changes from asset to inventory? The answer becomes clear as you observe the subtle modifications in your daily routine. Increased rations that improve your physical condition while making you dependent on continued provisioning. Reduced patrol assignments that preserve your health while limiting your knowledge of terrain routes. Enhanced medical attention that maintains your fitness while creating detailed documentation of your physical status. Treatment that looks like privilege but feels like preparation. The selection process requires careful consideration of multiple factors. Kane contributes, his analytical mind apparently finding intellectual satisfaction in optimizing systematic cannibalism. Immediate utility versus long-term sustainability, individual loyalty versus group cohesion, skill specialization versus replaceable functionality. You are being evaluated according to multiple criteria that will determine whether you live another day or become tomorrow's dinner. The most disturbing aspect is how reasonable the evaluation process sounds. Military units have always required difficult decisions about resource allocation, personnel management, acceptable losses in service to larger objectives. The only difference is that personnel management now includes personnel consumption, and acceptable losses now provide immediate nutritional benefits. The same logic that governs all military operations, applied to human resource management in its most literal sense. Martinez looks up from his letter writing, his young face showing the earnest dedication that has characterized him since joining the unit. "I've been thinking about legacy," he says with the solemnity of someone contemplating mortality. "About what it means to serve something larger than yourself, to contribute to humanity's survival even after your individual existence ends." Legacy. Martinez is contemplating the meaning of his eventual death, while the people around him plan exactly how that death will occur and what purposes it will serve. He's philosophizing about sacrifice while being prepared for literal sacrifice. Legacy is important. Voss agrees with genuine warmth, his voice carrying paternal affection that makes the entire conversation more horrifying. The best soldiers understand that individual survival is less important than mission success. That personal sacrifice enables collective victory. Personal sacrifice. Martinez's murder has been reframed as voluntary contribution to the unit's continued effectiveness, his death transformed from tragedy into tactical decision, his consumption recast as his own choice rather than your collective crime. "I want my service to mean something," Martinez continues, his eyes showing the idealistic fervor that makes young soldiers willing to die for abstract principles. "To know that my contribution to the Emperor's cause will continue even after I'm gone." His contribution will continue, through systematic digestion, by the people he considers his closest friends. You want to warn him, to explain what legacy actually awaits him, to provide some opportunity for escape or resistance. But warning, Martinez would require acknowledging your own complicity in the system that has marked him for consumption. Would mean admitting that you've been evaluating him as a meat source while accepting his trust and friendship. Would mean confronting the fact that you're more committed to your own survival than to his. The internal conflict tears at something fundamental in your psyche, but not enough to overcome the hunger that has become your primary motivating force. Not enough to risk your own position as consumer rather than consumed. Not enough to sacrifice the protein source that Martinez represents for the abstract principle of human dignity. Not enough to choose humanity over survival. The preparation protocols are quite sophisticated, Kane observes with professional admiration, apparently unaware of or unconcerned by Martinez's presence during the discussion. Nutritional optimization, stress reduction, quality maintenance, everything designed to maximize yield while minimizing waste. Preparation protocols. Martinez is being prepared according to established procedures that have been refined through extensive practice on previous subjects. Previous subjects who trusted the same people Martinez trusts, who believed the same lies Martinez believes, who died the same death Martinez will die. You realize that everyone who has disappeared from the unit went through the same process: increased rations, reduced duties, enhanced medical attention, meaningful conversations about legacy and sacrifice. All preparation for systematic slaughter disguised as improved working conditions. All of them treated exactly the way you're being treated now. The recognition hits you like physical impact, making your vision blur and your hands tremble with adrenaline response. Because you're not just evaluating Martinez for consumption. You're being evaluated by the same criteria, prepared by the same methods, optimized for the same ultimate purpose. You are both predator and prey, consumer and consumed, evaluator and evaluated. The beauty of the system, Voss explains with the satisfaction of someone who has solved complex logistical problems, is its recursive efficiency. Each successful procurement operation provides resources for maintaining and improving subsequent operations. Perfect sustainable methodology. Sustainable methodology, because consuming unit members provides the nutrition necessary to continue consuming unit members, creating a closed loop that maintains itself through systematic cannibalism. A perpetual motion machine powered by human flesh. You look around the barracks with new understanding, seeing not a military unit preparing for combat operations, but a feeding collective managing its food supply. Martinez writing his memorial letters while being fattened for consumption. Kane developing technical expertise in human butchery while being evaluated for his own eventual processing. Voss orchestrating systematic cannibalism while waiting for his own turn as the meal. Everyone simultaneously consumer and consumed, predator and prey, survivor and sacrifice. The hierarchy is temporary, shifting, determined by immediate operational requirements rather than permanent status. Today's procurement specialist becomes tomorrow's protein source when circumstances change or usefulness declines or replacement assets become available. Today's dinner guest becomes tomorrow's dinner. The psychological adaptation is remarkable, Martinez observes, apparently oblivious to the context of his own comment. How quickly human beings adjust to circumstances that should be impossible to endure. How readily we find meaning in situations that should destroy meaning. Psychological adaptation. Martinez is describing his own conditioning while being conditioned, analyzing his own preparation while being prepared, providing intellectual commentary on his own systematic dehumanization. You nod in agreement because the observation is accurate, insightful, appropriately philosophical for someone contemplating mortality and meaning. But you're nodding while planning how to position yourself to avoid selection when Martinez's preparation reaches completion. While calculating whether warning him might improve or worsen your own survival prospects. Adaptation is essential for imperial service. Voss contributes with ceremonial gravity. Rigid thinking leads to operational failure. Successful soldiers learn to modify their perspectives according to mission requirements. Mission requirements. Systematic cannibalism has been reframed as tactical adaptation, a necessary modification of traditional moral constraints in service to larger operational objectives. Murder and consumption transformed into professional flexibility. The conversation continues around topics that sound normal, professional, appropriate for soldiers discussing military service and personal development. But underneath the conventional language runs a current of predatory evaluation, a constant assessment of who might be selected next and when and by what criteria. A dinner party planning its next course while pretending to discuss philosophy. You participate in the conversation while simultaneously planning escape routes, identifying potential weapons, calculating odds of successful resistance against your squadmate's stern predators. But even as you plan rebellion, part of your mind continues evaluating Martinez's protein potential, continues appreciating the quality maintenance that Voss's preparation protocols have achieved. Even as you plot escape, you remain hungry for what escape would cost you, because leaving means abandoning the only reliable source of nutrition you've found in months, means returning to starvation and desperation, and the slow death that systematic cannibalism has temporarily forestalled. Means choosing moral purity over continued existence. The choice should be obvious, but it isn't, because months of hunger have rewired your priorities in ways that make survival trump morality, make nutrition more important than humanity, make continued consumption feel more essential than continued innocence, have made you willing to participate in systematic cannibalism rather than risk starvation. You close your eyes and try to remember what it felt like to be human, to see other people as inherently valuable rather than potentially edible. But all you can think about is how tender Martinez is going to be when properly prepared, how much protein his consumption will provide, how long his sacrifice will sustain the unit's continued operations, how grateful you'll be when he becomes dinner. Outside, the artillery continues its endless rhythm, counting down to the next procurement operation, the next systematic conversion of person into protein, the next communion of cannibals masquerading as imperial soldiers. Thump, thump, thump. The heartbeat of a dying world marking time until your own evaluation changes from asset to inventory, from consumer to consumed, from predator to prey. And you realize you're not sure which transformation terrifies you more. The discovery happens by accident, or what you've learned to recognize as the kind of accident that becomes inevitable when you start asking questions you should have asked months ago. You're searching Sergeant Voss's quarters for ammunition inventories, trying to reconcile reported expenditures with actual combat engagements, when your fingers encounter a hidden compartment behind his equipment locker. What you find inside changes everything you thought you understood about your situation. The documents are official, bearing proper Imperial seals, authenticated with bureaucratic precision, filed according to standard departmental munitorum protocols. But their contents read like bureaucratized madness, systematic horror, disguised as routine administrative procedures. Imperial Guard Manual 40-471C. Alternative Protein Procurement in Extended Siege Conditions. You read the title 3 times before your mind accepts what your eyes are reporting. This isn't desperate improvisation by a unit pushed beyond breaking point. This isn't criminal activity hidden from Imperial authority. This is official policy. Your hands shake as you open the manual to its first operational directive. When conventional supply lines are compromised for periods exceeding 60 standard days, unit commanders are authorized to implement alternative nutrition protocols to maintain combat effectiveness and preserve strategic assets. Alternative nutrition protocols. The bureaucratic language transforms cannibalism into proper military procedure, systematic murder into resource management. Your squad's systematic consumption of its own members is following official Imperial guidance. The manual continues with clinical precision that makes your stomach churn. Personnel selected for alternative procurement should be chosen according to established criteria: combat effectiveness rating, injury status, psychological stability, unit integration, and estimated nutritional yield. Priority should be given to individuals whose continued existence represents inefficient resource allocation. There are official criteria for selecting people to be eaten. You flip through pages that read like a combination of military manual and butcher's handbook. Detailed instructions for humane processing techniques. Guidelines for maintaining unit morale during procurement operations. Protocols for documentation and reporting of personnel converted to nutritional resources. The Imperium has industrialized cannibalism and disguised it as logistics, but the manual is just the beginning. Deeper in the compartment, you find communications from higher command levels, orders that trace the hierarchy of systematic human consumption from squad level to regimental level to sector command. Commissariat Directive 77, maintaining morale through strategic resource redistribution. The directive bears the personal seal of Commissar General Valdrek, whose reputation for unwavering loyalty to Imperial doctrine is legendary throughout the sector. His words carry the authority of someone speaking directly for the Emperor's will. Extended siege conditions require adaptive resource management that may conflict with conventional moral frameworks. Unit commanders are reminded that the highest loyalty is to operational effectiveness rather than individual preservation. Strategic resource redistribution should be implemented with appropriate ceremony to maintain spiritual cohesion. Strategic resource redistribution. Even a commissar general uses euphemisms when ordering systematic cannibalism. Even the Imperium's moral guardians require linguistic camouflage to authorize the consumption of human beings. You continue reading with growing horror that competes with relief, so profound it makes you dizzy. Relief because your squad's activities aren't criminal deviation from Imperial law, they're faithful implementation of Imperial policy. Relief because you're not monsters. You're model soldiers following official orders. The realization should be comforting, but instead it opens a chasm of existential terror that makes simple cannibalism seem almost innocent by comparison. Because if this is official policy, implemented across the sector, sanctioned at the highest levels of imperial authority. Then, how many other units are systematically consuming their own personnel? The next document provides partial answers, a sector-wide status report detailing alternative procurement operations across hundreds of military units. The scope is staggering. Entire regiments converted to cannibalism, complete army groups implementing systematic human consumption, millions of soldiers eating millions of other soldiers in an interconnected web of sanctioned murder. The siege isn't an isolated incident. It's a testing ground for imperial resource management strategies. Regiment after regiment listed with clinical efficiency, 47th Cadian shock troops, 73% personnel reduction through alternative procurement, combat effectiveness maintained at 85% baseline, 15th Tallarn Desert Raiders, successful implementation of rotating consumption protocols, morale remains high. 8th Krieg Death Corps, natural cultural adaptation to procurement requirements, requesting expanded operational parameters. Millions of loyal imperial soldiers systematically consuming each other while maintaining the pretense of fighting humanity's enemies. The reports read like agricultural statistics, yield ratios, processing efficiency, quality metrics for human meat production. But underneath the bureaucratic language, you recognize the same psychological patterns your own squad has developed. The same justifications, the same spiritual framework, the same transformation of cannibalism into religious observance, the same systematic destruction of human dignity disguised as imperial service. You find communication logs between unit commanders sharing best practices for human procurement and processing, technical discussions about optimal preparation methods, philosophical exchanges about maintaining unit cohesion through shared cannibalism, professional development for systematic cannibals masquerading as tactical consultation. The key is gradual introduction, writes Colonel Marnius of the 23rd Mordian Iron Guard. Begin with already deceased personnel, progress to wounded beyond medical salvation, advance to systematic selection of expendable assets. Unit adaptation occurs naturally without moral crisis. Gradual introduction. Your squad's progression from scavenging to systematic murder wasn't accidental. It was following established protocols designed to minimize psychological resistance. Your transformation into cannibals was engineered rather than evolved. Spiritual frameworks are essential, contributes Major Helena of the 5th Vestroyan Firstborn. Recontextualize consumption as imperial service, frame procurement as religious duty, emphasize continued service through nutritional sacrifice. The Emperor provides through his faithful's willing offering. Spiritual frameworks. Even your prayers, your communion ceremonies, your transformation of cannibalism into sacrament, all of it follows patterns established by other units, refined through experience, optimized for maximum psychological adaptation. Your religious horror was designed by committee. The documents continue with technical specifications that read like industrial manuals. Standard adult human yield, 35–40% usable protein. Processing time, 2–5 standard hours for complete breakdown. Storage requirements, refrigeration at 24 degrees Celsius, consumption within 72 hours optimal. Human beings have been reduced to industrial specifications, their lives converted to production statistics. But the most devastating document is the last one, a personal communication from Lord General Militant Thorn, overall commander of sector operations, to his staff officers. The alternative procurement protocols have exceeded all expectations. Combat effectiveness maintained despite 70% personnel reduction across affected units. Resource efficiency improved by 340%. Most significantly, unit loyalty and psychological cohesion have strengthened rather than deteriorated. Recommend expanding implementation to additional sectors. The systematic cannibalism isn't a desperate measure. It's a successful innovation. The communication continues with strategic implications that make your vision blur. Traditional military operations accept personnel as consumable resources. Alternative procurement transforms personnel into renewable resources. The psychological benefits of mutual complicity create unit bonds stronger than conventional discipline. Soldiers who have consumed their comrades cannot defect, cannot betray operational security, cannot maintain moral objections to necessary tactical decisions. You have been converted into the perfect Imperial soldier, one who cannot escape because escape would mean acknowledging participation in systematic cannibalism. The final paragraph contains the phrase that will haunt your remaining days. The Emperor protects his servants by teaching them to serve each other in all ways necessary for survival. Through consumption, we honor the faithful. Through digestion, we preserve their service. Through systematic procurement, we demonstrate that humanity will consume itself rather than submit to alien domination. The Imperium has decided that cannibalism is preferable to defeat. You sit in Voss's quarters, surrounded by official documentation of systematic horror, finally understanding the true scope of your situation. This isn't one squad driven to desperate measures. This isn't even one regiment losing moral coherence under impossible conditions. This is Imperial policy. This is how the Imperium of Man maintains military effectiveness when conventional resources fail. The sound of footsteps in the corridor makes you scramble to return the documents to their hiding place, but you know your face must show the impact of what you've discovered. When Voss enters his quarters, his expression shifts from casual authority to sharp assessment. He knows you found something. He knows you know. Educational reading. He asks with the tone of someone who has been expecting this conversation for some time. Of course he expected it. The discovery was probably inevitable, possibly intentional, maybe even part of your continued preparation. The manuals, you manage to say, though your voice sounds distant and mechanical to your own ears. The directives. The sector reports. The systematic documentation of humanity's willing consumption of itself. Voss nods with something approaching relief. Good. Ignorance was becoming operationally inefficient. Now we can discuss implementation parameters without euphemisms. Without euphemisms. Because you've graduated from requiring psychological protection to accepting direct participation in systematic cannibalism. Because you're ready to acknowledge what you've been doing all along. How long have you known? You ask, though part of you already understands that knowledge and acknowledgement are different categories entirely. Since before deployment, Voss replies with matter-of-fact precision. This siege was always intended as a testing ground for alternative procurement protocols. Our unit was selected specifically for psychological profiles, indicating high adaptation potential. Selected specifically. Your assignment to this unit wasn't random military bureaucracy. It was careful placement of individuals deemed likely to successfully transition from conventional soldiers to systematic cannibals. You were recruited for this role because someone believed you had the right psychological profile for eating human beings. The enemy. You ask, though you're no longer sure what that word means. Secondary concern, Voss responds with dismissive efficiency. The primary objective was always developing and refining human resource conversion protocols. Combat operations provided cover for procurement experimentation. The war itself is camouflage for systematic cannibalism research. The room seems to tilt around you as the final pieces of understanding lock into place. Siege, the isolation, the systematic starvation followed by mysterious protein sources, all of it orchestrated to create conditions where cannibalism becomes not just acceptable but spiritually meaningful, where consuming human beings feels like serving the Emperor. The next phase begins tomorrow. Voss continues with the business-like tone of someone discussing routine operational planning. Expanded procurement quotas, refined processing techniques, integration with other experimental units. There are other experimental units. Other groups of Imperial soldiers systematically consuming human beings while believing they serve humanity. And if I refuse? You ask, though the question feels abstract. Because refusal would mean starvation, isolation, death, or conversion from consumer to consumed. Because you've already consumed too much human flesh to claim moral authority for refusing to consume more. Voss's smile reveals teeth permanently stained with the residue of systematic cannibalism. Refusal isn't an option. You've already made your choice every time you swallowed, every time you thank the Emperor for his providence, every time you evaluated squad mates for protein content, every time you chose survival over humanity. You want to argue, to claim that you never chose this, that circumstances forced participation in activities you never would have chosen freely. But the taste of Henderson still lingers in your mouth, and Martinez's preparation protocols are scheduled to reach completion within days, and you find yourself already anticipating how tender he's going to be. The beauty of the system, Voss explains with genuine pedagogical pride, is that it eliminates the need for choice. Survival requires consumption. Consumption requires systematic procurement. Systematic procurement requires abandoning obsolete moral frameworks. By the time you understand what you're participating in, you're already too invested to withdraw. Too invested to withdraw. Because withdrawing would mean acknowledging that you've spent months systematically consuming human beings while pretending to serve the Emperor. Outside, the artillery continues its endless rhythm, no longer marking siege duration, but counting the beats of a heart that pumps human blood through systems designed to process human flesh. Thump, thump, thump. The heartbeat of an imperium that has learned to consume itself rather than acknowledge defeat. The pulse of a civilization that has discovered systematic cannibalism can be disguised as religious observance. The drumbeat of humanity's willing transformation into something that feeds on itself. You look at Sergeant Voss, loyal servant of the Emperor, faithful implementer of imperial policy, successful practitioner of systematic human consumption, and realize that he represents exactly what the Imperium intended you to become, what you have already become. In his name we feast, Voss says with ceremonial gravity that makes the words sound like sacred oath rather than cannibalistic motto, and you find yourself responding automatically. In his name we serve. Because that's what this is. Service. Faithful implementation of imperial will. Perfect loyalty to the God Emperor of mankind demonstrated through the systematic consumption of his faithful. The ultimate expression of human devotion, willingly eating each other rather than submitting to alien domination. Tomorrow the expanded procurement operations begin. Tomorrow you'll help select the next batch of protein sources from among your remaining squad mates. Tomorrow you'll participate more actively in activities that have transformed you from human being into something that serves humanity by consuming it. Tomorrow you'll discover exactly how much imperial service can cost while still feeling like salvation. But tonight, you bow your head in prayer, thanking the Emperor for his guidance, his wisdom, his perfect providence in teaching you to serve his will through the consumption of his faithful. In his name you feast, and through feasting you serve. The prayer tastes like human flesh seasoned with damnation, and somehow, that still feels like the most sincere worship you've ever offered. 6 months later, you stand in what was once the command bunker of the 47th Cadian Shock Troops, wearing the insignia of a procurement specialist, a rank that doesn't exist in any official imperial hierarchy, but has become essential to military operations across the sector. The smell of properly prepared protein fills the air, rich and savory in a way that would have horrified you a lifetime ago. Now it smells like home. The meal before you represents the culmination of everything you've learned about human resource conversion. Private Martinez, sweet, innocent Martinez who wrote poetry to his dead mother, has been transformed into what might be the finest protein source your unit has ever processed. The meat is perfectly aged, optimally seasoned, prepared according to techniques refined through months of experience. He tastes exactly like salvation. Your current squad consists entirely of specialists now, soldiers who have demonstrated exceptional adaptation to alternative procurement protocols. Corporal Kane has been promoted to processing coordinator, his analytical mind proving invaluable for developing efficient butchery techniques. Sergeant Voss has become regional procurement administrator, overseeing human resource conversion across multiple units. You've all been promoted based on your skill at systematically consuming human beings. The irony is that you've never been more effective as Imperial soldiers. Your unit maintains perfect discipline, absolute loyalty, complete operational security. No one deserts because desertion would mean abandoning reliable nutrition sources. No one reports irregular activities because everyone participates in those activities. No one questions orders because questioning authorities who control food distribution is a form of suicide. You've become exactly what the Imperium always claimed to want: soldiers whose loyalty is absolute because alternatives to loyalty are impossible. Efficiency reports from across the sector continue to exceed projections. Voss announces during the pre-meal briefing, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone whose experimental programs have proven successful beyond expectations. Combat effectiveness maintained at 90% baseline despite 85% personnel reduction through alternative procurement. 85% of your fellow soldiers have been systematically consumed, and everyone considers this a success story. The statistics are staggering when viewed sector-wide. Over 3 million Imperial Guardsmen have been processed as nutritional resources over the past 6 months. Their continued service, as protein sources rather than combat personnel, has enabled the remaining 450,000 soldiers to maintain military operations indefinitely. 3 million human beings have been eaten by their comrades, and this is counted as operational victory. More significantly, Kane contributes with analytical precision. Psychological cohesion metrics have improved across all participating units. Shared complicity eliminates traditional discipline problems. Mutual dependence creates loyalty structures stronger than conventional military hierarchy. Mutual complicity. Because everyone who has consumed human flesh is equally guilty, equally committed to maintaining the system that keeps them fed, equally invested in justifying activities that should be unjustifiable. Everyone is trapped by their own participation in systematic cannibalism. The beauty of the system, and you've learned to appreciate its beauty with genuine aesthetic admiration, is its self-perpetuating nature. Each act of consumption creates psychological investment in continued consumption. Each successful procurement operation provides resources for the next operation. Each soldier converted to protein source makes the remaining soldiers more dependent on the conversion process. Perfect Imperial efficiency applied to human resource management. Today's meal represents optimal achievement of established quality standards. You report with professional pride that would have horrified your former self. Subject preparation conducted according to refined protocols, processing completed with minimal waste, presentation optimized for ceremonial significance. Martinez has been converted to dinner with the same attention to detail that once characterized your military service. The pre-meal prayers have evolved into elaborate liturgical ceremonies that rival anything conducted by the official ecclesiarchy. Your unit's chaplain, a position filled by whoever demonstrates greatest theological creativity in justifying cannibalism, leads invocations that transform systematic murder into religious observance. We gather in grateful recognition of the Emperor's providence, acknowledging his wisdom in teaching us to serve humanity through the consumption of his faithful. Through this communion, we honor those who continue their service through nutritional sacrifice. The words feel more meaningful than any religious ceremony you participated in during your previous life, because the blessed sacrament is tangible, immediate, undeniably real. The Emperor's providence manifests as actual sustenance rather than abstract promise. Faith demonstrated through digestion. Around the table, Your fellow specialists bow their heads in reverent acknowledgement of the meal's significance. Each face shows the transformation that occurs when survival depends on systematic consumption of human beings, a kind of spiritual evolution that adapts moral frameworks to operational requirements, a kind of enlightenment that comes from learning to serve the emperor by eating his faithful. The first bite explodes across your palate with familiar complexity, Martinez's dreams and hopes and personality distilled into consumable form. You chew slowly, reverently, allowing each element of his essence to register before swallowing. He tastes like innocence preserved in sacrifice. Martinez would have been proud, Kane observes with genuine sentiment, his scarred features showing appreciation for both the meal and its source. Always talked about wanting his service to have lasting meaning. Hard to imagine more lasting meaning than literally sustaining his squadmates' continued operations. Lasting meaning. Martinez's murder has been transformed into meaningful sacrifice through the alchemy of necessity and religious interpretation. His unwilling death has become voluntary offering through systematic recontextualization. His consumption has become the most sincere form of honoring his memory. The conversation flows around topics that have become routine despite remaining surreal: technical evaluation of preparation methods, appreciation for optimal procurement timing, speculation about next month's selection criteria. All conducted while consuming someone you knew personally, someone whose fears and hopes you understood, someone who trusted you enough to share his poetry. All conducted as if systematic cannibalism is the most natural thing in the world, because it has become natural. More natural than the artificial moral constraints that once made human consumption unthinkable. More natural than the arbitrary distinctions between acceptable and unacceptable forms of resource utilization. More natural than pretending that survival doesn't require systematic consumption of whatever resources become available. The expansion into civilian populations has exceeded expectations, Voss reports with bureaucratic satisfaction. Urban processing facilities now maintain production quotas that supply multiple military units. Quality remains high. Distribution efficiency continues to improve. Urban processing facilities. The civilian population of Hive World Tertius has been converted into systematic protein production, their lives reorganized around providing nutrition for military operations. Entire cities have become human farms managed by people who were once their protectors. The implications ripple outward in ways that would have been incomprehensible months ago, but now feel like inevitable optimization. Why maintain inefficient civilian populations when they can be converted to efficient nutrition sources? Why waste resources on non-productive personnel when they can become productive protein? Why preserve humanity when humanity can be consumed in service to the Imperium? Phase 3 implementation begins next month. Voss continues with the tone of someone announcing routine operational upgrades. Integration with neighboring sectors, standardization of procurement protocols, establishment of permanent processing infrastructure. Phase 3. The systematic cannibalism that began as desperate improvisation has become permanent imperial policy, expanding across multiple sectors with the bureaucratic efficiency that characterizes all successful military innovations. Human consumption is being institutionalized as standard operating procedure. You listen to the planning discussions while savoring Martinez's sacrifice, your mind automatically cataloging logistical requirements and resource allocation strategies. Because this is your profession now, managing the systematic conversion of human beings into consumable resources for military operations. Because you've become exceptionally good at it. The meal concludes with prayers of gratitude that feel more sincere than any religious observance from your previous life. Because the blessings are immediate, tangible, undeniably beneficial. Martinez's sacrifice has literally strengthened your body, nourished your spirit, enabled your continued service to the God Emperor of mankind. His death has become your salvation. Through Martinez's sacrifice, we continue serving the Emperor's will. The chaplain intones with ceremonial gravity that makes the words feel like binding covenant rather than simple acknowledgement. Through his sacrifice, we serve. The assembly responds in unison, and the commitment feels more real than any military oath you've ever sworn, because this covenant is sealed with blood and confirmed through consumption. You bow your head in final prayer, Martinez's essence flowing through your bloodstream, his sacrifice enabling your continued existence in service to humanity's survival. The prayer tastes like human flesh seasoned with divine approval, and for the first time in your life, you understand what it truly means to serve the Emperor, not through abstract devotion to distant ideals, but through immediate participation in activities that demonstrate absolute commitment to human survival regardless of cost. Not through conventional morality that limits operational effectiveness, but through adaptive ethics that optimize resource utilization under extreme conditions. Through the systematic consumption of humanity in service to humanity's continued existence. Outside, the artillery has fallen silent. Not because the siege has ended, but because there are no longer enough people left to maintain siege operations. The enemy withdrew weeks ago, their objectives accomplished through means they never could have imagined. They wanted to destroy the Imperium's military capacity. Instead, they taught the Imperium to consume itself. But you've survived. Your unit has not only survived but prospered, grown stronger, achieved perfect operational efficiency through methods that would horrify conventional military doctrine. You've learned to serve the Emperor by eating his faithful, to preserve humanity by consuming human beings, to maintain imperial strength by systematically reducing imperial population. You've discovered that the truest loyalty is the willingness to become something inhuman in service to human survival. Tomorrow brings new procurement operations, expanded processing quotas, refined consumption protocols. Tomorrow, you'll help select the next group of protein sources from among the remaining population. Tomorrow, you'll participate in activities that have transformed you from human being into something that serves humanity by consuming it. Tomorrow, you'll continue serving the Emperor through the systematic consumption of his faithful. But tonight, you sit in comfortable satisfaction, well-fed and spiritually fulfilled, surrounded by comrades whose loyalty has been forged through shared participation in systematic cannibalism. Tonight, you're exactly what the Imperium needs, a soldier whose dedication is absolute because alternatives to dedication have been systematically consumed. Tonight, you're the perfect Imperial citizen, one who serves humanity by eating human beings. The taste of Martinez lingers in your mouth like communion wine, sweet with innocence, complex with sacrifice, satisfying in ways that transcend simple nutrition. You roll the flavor around your tongue, extracting every trace of meaning from his transformation into sacrament. In his name, you feast, and through feasting, you've learned the ultimate truth about service in the 41st millennium, that the Emperor protects his faithful by teaching them to consume each other rather than submit to alien domination. That humanity's greatest strength is its willingness to eat itself rather than admit defeat. The prayer concludes with words that have become your unit's motto, your personal creed, your spiritual foundation. Grant us this day our daily flesh, and forgive us our consumption, as we consume those who trusted in us. And somehow, that still feels like the most sincere worship you've ever offered. Outside, silence replaces the artillery's rhythm. Inside, you digest human flesh while praising the Emperor for his providence. Between those spaces lies the truth about what it means to serve the Imperium of man when all other options have been systematically consumed. It tastes like salvation seasoned with damnation. And you've learned to be grateful for both flavors.